Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. In the first segment of today's show, we're going to discuss that vote that took place in the UK Parliament of the Brexit deal of Boris Johnson has now been voted through. This has been, of course, a tough road to even get this through in the UK House of Commons. As we know, Theresa May has failed here a number of times, as did Boris Johnson initially as well. But now with the new majority that he enjoys in the House of Parliament there, he has been able to get this deal through. What does this deal mean for the UK going forward? What does this mean for the possibility of a hard Brexit, considering there is to be no extension to Brexit anymore? Let's discuss that a bit further. We're now joined by Patrick Maxwell, who is joining us now from the UK itself. He is a columnist at The Speaker, amongst a number of other places where he writes for, as well as a political analyst. Patrick, thank you for your time today. Patrick, what do you make of the vote that took place in Parliament?
Well, Theresa May failed many times to get her Brexit deal through. Boris Johnson failed before. This is the first time that any Prime Minister has been able to get a Brexit ban through the House of Commons. And Boris Johnson has been able to do this because of the election he had last week, an overwhelming majority for his Conservative government. And his mandate for that, his policy of getting Brexit done, was his main election slogan. And that's what he's just started doing now. This is the first stage. He's got his withdrawal agreement through for the first time, really. And now we see that he needs to get a trade deal with the EU by December of next year.
And is that even possible? Because, many people are questioning that, saying it's just simply too rushed.
Yes, the EU have been saying that potentially there isn't enough time for this trade deal to get through. But you have to put this in context, because in the summer, when Boris Johnson came to power, everyone said there's no way that he's going to get a new withdrawal agreement, and yet he did and got the general election and has now got it through. And the fact that he has such a huge mandate in the House of Commons to do this means that, unlike Theresa May, he has the ability to say to the EU, if you give me this trade deal, I have the ability to pass it very easily in the House of Commons. And so he is in the greatest position that any Prime Minister has been in to get this Brexit deal through. Right. His new election and his new majority has meant that now he has the power. And I don't think the EU are going to be able to say by December of next year, we haven't got a deal for you, because the trade deal has been under, we know about the trade deal for a few years now. Yeah. We know that there needs to be an agreement, and they've got a year to do it. Boris Johnson should have the ability to do so.
All right, so Patrick, we've spoken about the trade deal. Now there's also the question of the hard Brexit. Many people saying that is still very much a possibility because of what's passed in Parliament yesterday, or in fact just recently, ensures that there will be no more extensions. Is a hard Brexit still possible, do you think?
Well, many people say that Boris Johnson's deal is a hard Brexit because it removes the EU from the single market. It removes the UK, from the single market, and it removes the UK from the customs union, which are the two main trading relationships that make the EU the biggest trading bloc in the world. So many people would say that is a hard Brexit in itself. If we don't get a trade deal by December of next year, we will leave without a deal, called no deal in Britain, which could definitely mean a hard Brexit, yes, because there will be no future trading relationship between the UK and the EU. That would be definitely damaging to the UK's economic prospects going forwards, and they would need to get a deal. Boris Johnson has now ruled out extending Brexit again. Theresa May had to extend Brexit. Initially, we're going to leave almost a year ago now. So there's definitely no mood for extending Brexit further. But yes, it's true. If they don't get a deal by December of next year, we will leave on hard Brexit terms.
One of the interesting news pieces that I think as well is about a lot of billionaire supporters of the Conservative Party actually seeking citizenship in places like Cyprus. I imagine that isn't a good sign, is it, for confidence, investor confidence even, in the UK economy post-Brexit, whenever that does happen and in whatever shape it happens, be it through a deal or hard Brexit. Do you think that those concerns of the UK economy are legitimate?
Well, I think it's definitely true for most people that or most economists, that Brexit will make the UK less prosperous in the short term. But I think business knows now what is going to happen. They know about the deal. They know that Brexit is going to happen. And so they are making contingency plans. But in a way, there's nothing new about this story. Cyprus is a tax haven. It's not as though they're going off to, say, Romania or Bulgaria or something, which is in the EU. They're going off to Cyprus, which is a tax haven. And lots of Tory donors have done this in the past. But yes, it does show, perhaps, that for some businesses, they know that the brightest future for the UK is inside the single market and the customs union. And that Boris Johnson's plan to get out of that is putting many businesses aside in Britain. But I don't think there's a huge economic downfall that we can expect from any form of Brexit at the moment, because we're not leaving on hard Brexit terms. There is an agreement between the UK and the EU as it stands.
Okay, so two more points that I want to make before letting go, Patrick. One is about the NHS. There's been a lot of concern, and as you know, during the election campaign as well, Labour had come out with what it called a redacted document, which it revealed to Britons, seemingly that didn't convince people enough that the NHS would be put up in a trade deal with the US. But do you think that Boris Johnson and his ministers would want to privatize parts of the NHS?
Politically, an extremely dangerous move. In the election, many people thought that could potentially change the way the election went. The NHS is supposedly the only religion Britain really has, free at the point of use. I don't think it would be sensible for Boris Johnson to put that on the table, proverbially, and it's extremely unpopular in Britain. I don't think there was much chance of that happening in a trade deal with the US, especially after the election, and especially after this supposed dossier that Jeremy Corbyn got his hands on. I don't think there's much chance of the NHS being put on the table in any Brexit or US deal.
And as a final point then, if we're talking about workers' rights, as you know, the bill that's being passed now loses a clause that had been originally included about strengthening workers' rights. And the main workers' union there, the TUC, has warned that this will now drive down working conditions in the UK. And this is on top of the concern about other regulations, which the EU obviously ruled while the UK chose to remain in the bloc. Do you think that regulations, working rights, etc., will sort of be in haphazard state right now during this sort of transition period as the UK figures out what it needs to do?
Well, one of the reasons for many people in 2016 voting to leave the European Union was that the EU had too much control, they said, over regulations in the UK, and that we didn't have enough say over our own laws, our borders and our money, was their slogan. So over regulations, I think many of those will just be changed into UK law. And so they can, for the principle, they can be voted on by the UK Parliament. In terms of workers' rights, there is much concern among Labour MPs who, earlier this year, quite a few of them were considering voting for Theresa May's deal, but they didn't on the basis that it didn't enshrine workers' rights as much as they would have wanted it to. So there is an issue over that. But again, there will be more political pressure for Boris Johnson to enshrine that in UK law after we leave the EU.
Very well. Patrick, we'll leave there at that. We appreciate your time this morning speaking to us there from Oxford, UK. That was Patrick Maxwell. I'll be back with my next segment, though, after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment of today's program, we're going to discuss two main issues coming out of the United Kingdom. One is about the Islamophobia, or actually I should say anti-discrimination inquiry or review, either way that you may want to term it, that the Conservative Party of the UK is set to now carry out. It will be led by a professor named Swaran Singh, who has been accused of holding Islamophobic and even anti-Kashmir views. That's according to articles that he's written in the past, and that's been brought forth by Tory peer Sayed Awarsi in a number of tweets that she had put out online. Now, what does this mean for confidence in this process going forward? the biggest alarm bells were really the fact that this will not just be concentrating on Islamophobia as it should have, as was originally demanded by the Muslims in the UK, that this will be a more broad-based inquiry into just discrimination within the Tory party. That's one issue. And another issue, of course, is the fact that Boris Johnson, who is, as you know, still Prime Minister of the UK and has in fact won quite a large majority, had promised during his campaign as well, and his party had promised that they would pass a law against the BDS movement. Of course, that would be to appease the pro-Israel lobby within the UK as well. What does that mean then for free speech? What does that mean for any stance of neutrality on the part of the UK government towards the issue of Israel-Palestine? Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now by Arzu, who is one of the founders of the Islamic Human Rights Commission, and she's also co-author of Environment of Hate, The New Normal for Muslims in the UK. She's joining us now from London. Also joining us from London is Shahid, who's senior analyst with BBC and chief editor of the London Post. He also speaks regularly at Cambridge University and to media, of course, around the world. Let me thank both Shahid and Arzu for their time today and for speaking to us this morning from the UK. Shahid, let me start with you, if I may. On this issue of Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, do you think that the Conservatives are prepared to actually admit that there is even really Islamophobia within their party?
Well, somehow they have admitted it's an elephant in the room. They can't deny that it doesn't exist. Saeed Awarsi has also mentioned recently in a comment, and the existence of Islamophobia is always not only in Conservative Party, it is also in, for example, in Labour Party, and it's an issue around within the society. And I think being living here and being observing all these things, it is most of the time they use it as a distraction to the people from the real issues. For example, the financial, economic issues, the austerity measures. So they come up with sometimes immigration, Islamophobia, or anti-Semitism. These are the things which take the headlines, and people don't ask questions about the Brexit, why we are having Brexit, why we need it. These are the questions, for example, the role of banks, the role of offshore banking, the transparency in the taxation systems. These were the questions which were asked by the European Commission and which led to the sudden referendum on Brexit. And now we are having this another mess that how we're going to get out of Europe without having a proper policy.
Indeed. And Arzu, I imagine the biggest person who should be questioned about his Islamophobic views would be the Prime Minister himself, wouldn't he? Because he's called, women in hijab letterboxes in the past and a whole number of other derogatory terms towards minorities of all sorts. But even if we're just honing in on Islamophobia for a moment, do you think that this process under Swaran Singh will be satisfactory at any level?
Thank you for having me on. As you said, you would think that the Prime Minister would be the first person to be investigated, but clearly that's not going to happen. And I think in a way, Dr. Quraishi is right, that this whole kind of argument we've been having about racism is a fig leaf for other problems. I think the particularity of the so-called Islamophobia and not Islamophobia inquiry in the Tory party has two kind of main aspects to it. Firstly, it kind of shows the powerlessness of Muslims in terms of being able to actually get any kind of redress from a party that's led by someone who's openly racist. He's not just Islamophobic. He's made all sorts of anti-black comments. If you read his novel, he's been quite anti-Semitic as well. Some of the most basic caricatures of Jewish people that honestly I haven't seen in any literature growing up. And, I'm not such a young person. These things would have been taboo when I was younger. Never mind sort of in the present day. So, yes, we have a travesty of process, justice, etc. with regard to the particularity of this inquiry. He has, in fact, already apologized for offence cause and for Islamophobia in the party. But it also shows, actually, the normalization of not just anti-Muslim hatred, but anti-Muslim hatred as the vanguard of a very racist society that we live in, actually.
But then, Arzu, the argument, if I may come in, the argument from the Conservative side, if I may just play devil's advocate for a moment, would be, listen, there are actually minorities in cabinet positions, Sajid Javid, Priti Patel, and others. Those are minorities in the UK. They're representing minorities in the UK. So how then can the Conservatives really be racist?
This is a very common kind of trope and excuse, and it's something that's been used forever by everyone, whether it was New Labour, whether it was, other institutions, etc., etc. We know that participation does not equal proper representation, does not equal anti-discrimination, let alone some kind of proactive form of trying to understand, the minorities of this country, whether they're religious, ethnic, by class, etc., or gender. So this is just a very poor publicity exercise. I don't know that any minorities are particularly fooled. Certainly, some minorities are a bit savvy about how to use that, but I don't think anyone truly believes that this is somehow an anti-racist government or an anti-racist party. Their campaigning, their kind of policies are so explicitly racist. If you see the pledge with regard to what would effectively completely clamp down on Roma communities' rights to travel in this country, that was proposed and championed by Priti Patel. I mean, these people are not much use if they're actually pushing the very racist agenda that we're all complaining about. Sajid Javid, we could sit here till, tomorrow going through the problems that he had at the Home Office, now as Chancellor, how these policies disproportionately affect marginalised communities, especially and including Muslims.
Indeed. All right, so Shahid, what are your on that? Do you think that, as Arzu there said, that just because you have somebody who is from a minority community as a minister of the cabinet, that that's not enough, that you need to actually have the policies in place and that reflect that? And do you think that that is then not happening within the Conservative Party? What does that then mean then in an era of Brexit? Is this only going to get worse for minorities in the UK?
I'll give a very famous quote came out from Iran after the revolution when Imam Khomeini was putting these generals and these Savak terrorist intelligence agents on trial. And somebody asked him that, why are you killing all these intelligent generals and all that? And he very famously, reportedly said that what's the point of having a general who's already on the enemy's side? So I will just bring it back to, not in that context, but just bring it back to I said in the parliament to Yasmin Quraishi, who was a Labour Party MP, in a debate that you should not take responsibility for all the Muslims because you're responsible for your own constituency. And you shouldn't be coming out and defending or not defending. It's the responsibility of all the Muslims living in their own constituencies. They should be active enough to contact their MPs for this. Now, coming back to the Sajid Javid and Priti Patel, we shouldn't consider that they are our representatives. They are not our representatives. They are British-born. They have fit into their own ambitions, and they are not representative of the British Muslims or blacks or anyone else. It is their profession, it's their career. We don't expect them to, and I don't expect them to do anything better for us, because it's an exercise of fit in. I have spoken to a lot of Labour and Conservatives, members of Parliament, and when you talk about anti-Semitism, for some reason they will bring it in a fit-in exercise with the Jewish community. Some will say, "Oh, my daughter's boyfriend is a Jew," or some will say, "My daughter's husband," or "My daughter's my son's girlfriend is a Jewish." So it's more of they will give you this thing. They're trying to fit in. And they try to us to believe that there's no anti-Semitism.
If that is the case, Shahid, then whose responsibility is it? If it is the responsibility of Muslim organizations, why haven't the likes of the Muslim Council of Britain or others who represent the UK's Muslims, why haven't they been able to be stronger on this issue? Why hasn't there been more unity, do you think, to then pressurize, be it the Conservative Party, Labour Party, or whoever else may hold Islamophobic views?
Well, you mentioned the name of an MP who is anti-Kashmir. I have seen a document when a Labour MP from Southall, he mentioned he's very anti Kashmir policies, although we have a lot of Kashmiris there. So there are individuals from Indian background, for example, they support the Indian narrative of Kashmir, and they openly support it, and they have their own profession. With regards to the responsibility, I will not, I remember in 1999 when they come up with this immigration bill that you have to put £10,000 bond if you're asking your relative to come and visit UK. And I on a radio program, I suggested all the British Muslims or all the Pakistanis who are affected by this policy, they should write to the Home Office, to the Home Secretary, and make their voice heard. That is what is needed. MCB or any other organizations, they are dependent on fundings and they are dependent on council funding, etc. They have their own limits. But it is an information which needs to be spread and reacted by the larger community. I remember I was on a Radio 5 program, and I said that if the Jews affected by the Holocaust can be compensated, why not the people who are victims of slavery? Why can't they be compensated because obviously the beneficiary of slavery are still alive. And I could see it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and somebody from Glasgow called in, and they were really angry about comparing slavery with the Holocaust in Germany. So it needs to be a proactive approach.
Indeed.
Instead of shifting the blame to any organization, I think it's an individual act. And that's why Jewish community was able to, they have a community safety teams in my area where I live. I have Jewish cars basically with wirelesses moving around in Stamford Hill and in Golders Green basically. They have their own security, they have their own fences, they have their own wirelesses. I think
I'm just going to come in, Shahid, because before letting you and Arzu go, get both of your thoughts as well. Arzu, I'll start with you about an issue which would, of course, be very close to the heart of many Muslims in the UK, and that, of course, the issue of Palestine. And I wanted to broach that as well because, as you well know, and as I mentioned in my introduction, Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party very unashamedly had said that, listen, we're going to pass an anti-BDS law in the country if we win. And, of course, they have won a majority now. Possibly that can get through Parliament fairly easily when they do take that step. What would that mean? Many people are saying it's not as bad as the anti-BDS laws in the United States, but nevertheless, it will stifle talk, will it not, of criticizing Israel openly?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. And it doesn't matter whether it's as bad as the States or not, or even as bad as Germany, which is another country that has pushed ahead or is pushing ahead with type of move. It's catastrophic, and it's a big shift in what was already, I mean, we didn't have it very easy here when it came to these issues, and we were continuously under attack when it came to peaceful, non-violent activism against apartheid and racism perpetrated by Israeli authorities in the occupied territories. Of Palestine. What we end up now is that kind of very basic civil society action, something that we should be able to take for granted, is being criminalized in effect. So, the implications of that are quite astounding. It's not just about this issue. It's about the political space that we live in. How is it that people can actually hold dissenting views? How can they actually campaign politically? Whether it's about this or any other issue, if our speech is criminalized, if our actions are criminalized, in a way that I think if it happened in a Middle Eastern country, we would be jumping up and down and screaming and shouting blue murder, really and truly, from this side of the world, saying this is unacceptable, this is, political persecution, etc., etc. I think Dr. Quraishi raised a couple of very interesting points, and one of them is the fact that we, as activists, don't actually call something by its name. We are just stuck in the paradigm of the way the government talks. We won't compare slavery to the Holocaust without being fearful of a backlash. Yeah. Actually, we should be saying things like this. Why are you politically persecuting us?
Indeed. Well, actually, we'll have to leave it there for now with both Arzu and Shahid. But of course, we do appreciate both of your times today and for sharing your thoughts on this issue. Viewers, do stay with us. We're going to continue talking about these two issues right after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi, and as promised, we're going to continue discussing, as I said, the issue of Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, as well as a possible anti-BDS law, which will be passed by the UK government in the not-so-long future. To discuss that a bit further, we're firstly joined by Robbie Travers, who is with the Gatestone Institute. He's a government advisor and political consultant, and he's joining us now from London. Robbie, as always, we appreciate your time. What do you make, Robbie, of this issue of the anti-BDS law? Do you think it's appropriate at this time, and what does that then mean for free speech and legitimate criticism of Israel?
I think it's an interesting law in two parts, because firstly, it deals with public organizations and what they are allowed to do. Now, I think there is a legitimate argument that a public organisation, for example, a local city council or an organisation that is owned by the UK government, should not be able to pursue a separate foreign policy or a divestment policy whilst it is a part of the UK government and essentially running its own shadow foreign policy. I think that's one part of the argument. On the other hand, I am very much aware that it is potentially very dangerous to simply single out a single cause not to allow divestment and sanctions of. If we are not allowing organisations to run a shadow foreign policy, it must be complete and for all organisations, not simply just Israel. And I think on that basis, passing a sole anti-BDS law is dangerous and questionable when we are not considering why we are not doing so for all forms of other divestment. If we are having a single policy, we must have a single policy, not just one with one exception, which you cannot do.
But I wonder, what is the issue with BDS to begin with, do you think, Robbie? Because many have labeled it an anti-Semitic movement, but I mean, it's the right of people, is it not, to protest a cause, even in a united fashion, if they so wish, in this non-violent fashion, by boycotting and asking others to divest from the occupied Palestinian territories?
Absolutely, and I think it is. You're absolutely right. I think there should be absolutely no legal recuse to stopping an individual or individuals boycotting Israel. I think that's only simply fair. I think you cannot stop individuals from boycotting. What I would say, though, on that note, is that there is a level at which, if you are a government organisation, you cannot allow organisations within your organisation to pursue what is a separate foreign policy. And that essentially means that if you have a policy for a government, you cannot therefore have organisations within the government saying, well, this may be our foreign policy, but we will do something slightly different. So if it's a government organisation, I would say that there has to be a government single policy. But the anti-BDS law should not, and I don't think it is proposed to at the moment, affect any private individual.
Okay, so we're now going to ask, and we're actually going to be joined by Harry Fear, who is a journalist and filmmaker. He's originally from Oxford in the UK, but he's currently joining us from Lyon in France to join the conversation with Robbie. Harry, Robbie there was making the point about this BDS law that may be passed in the UK soon, as Johnson and the Conservatives had promised they would, about the issue that when you have government organizations choosing their own respective foreign policies, and in this case, of course, towards Israel, that then creates a problematic situation in any respective country where the federal government, if I may use that term, has different policies from respective smaller municipalities. Is that a fair argument, do you think?
Yes, that's definitely a fair argument. I think the two main issues that arise immediately with regard to this upcoming BDS law is that, first of all, the Conservative Party in the UK haven't won a mandate for this policy. They've just pulled it out of the hat as a surprise. To the best of my knowledge, within 72 hours of winning the landslide general election result, they sent off an official to Jerusalem to meet with the Israeli government, and then they announced that they're going to do this step, which of course is something that the Netanyahu regime would be most pleasured by. And I think the first point then is that this is an anti-democratic move. It's just been pulled out of the hat. The issue we have with the UK is that we don't really have scrutiny of foreign policy. We have a massive democratic deficit when it comes to foreign policy. Foreign policy barely was present in the general election debate. And so this has been able to come up really completely under the radar. And I think the second issue is, as I say, this is obviously somewhat anti-democratic in the way it's come about, but it's also anti-democratic in nature. And, you know, those of us that feel very sorely about this news, at the moment we're just crying, wishing that we had a First Amendment in the UK.
So then, Robbie, if I may connect this with the issue then of Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, because it seems that the Conservatives are heading a way which many would find worrisome, wouldn't they? That the trend seems to be that it's a stifling speech or stifling people's right to protest in a fashion that they choose to, nonviolent, of course, and then not even acknowledging if they have hate within their own ranks. I'm talking specifically, of course, about Islamophobia, because that's been an issue within specifically the Conservative Party, where there's just been denial almost from day one about even recognizing this issue. That's worrisome, is it not?
Yes, it is. And I would say to you that actually the most worrying thing here is that there has been a total failure in the establishment of an inquiry, not in the actual basis of establishing an inquiry, but on the basis of what its mandate is. This mandate is not examining who is causing Islamophobia, how they're causing Islamophobia, and what exact level of anti-Muslim hatred we are seeing within the Conservative Party. We are essentially seeing a very, very strange inquiry that will take a roundabout view of, where has this come from, and, where is it going, and, what is the Conservative Party's disciplinary organisation like? Well, I'm afraid that's not good enough. I want to see a Conservative Party in which every single Muslim in the UK could feel comfortable being in, and there is absolutely no excuse for Muslims feeling unaccepted or unwelcome in this party. And I think that the inquiry does not go far enough. But what I would say is I do think there is another problem in which we saw some of the criticism of the inquiry mistook some of the criticisms of Islam as Islamophobia. Now, anti-Muslim bigotry is disgusting and must be rooted out, but you have to allow theological criticism, and there needs to be a sensible guideline on that, and we need to find a medium in which we punish those who wish to hurt and harm our Islamic communities, but not those who have criticisms of religious belief.
Yeah, that's fair enough, of course. Harry, I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Swaran Singh, who has been given, who's to chair essentially this inquiry into discrimination. It's not actually even an inquiry into Islamophobia specifically. It's just discrimination, the macro issue, really. He has expressed views in the past, writing for Spiked and in other places as well, which are anti-Kashmir and then anti-Muslim really at quite a significant level also. That's worrisome, is it not? I mean, can we really have confidence in the Conservative Party wanting to address the hatred within its ranks?
Well, the Conservative Party doesn't want to address the hatred in its ranks. It will, if it does have this inquiry, which I will believe it when I see it, it will have been dragged into doing so, and it will be perhaps with a veneer of legitimacy, but it will be the weakest inquiry you've ever seen into this kind of behavior and conduct. And the reason why is because the head of the party and our prime minister is a confirmed racist, a confirmed homophobe, a confirmed Islamophobe. And so, of course, it's absolutely impossible that the inquiry would be broad, because if it were to be so, our prime minister would be seen to be vulnerable. And so it'll be a very weak posit. And I think it's very important to draw here a link, actually, between this BDS law that's upcoming and the issue of Islamophobia and racism and prejudice. Because, in fact, the BDS law, regardless of the merits or demerits of BDS itself, which is another conversation, the BDS law would be an anti-Palestinian racist law. And I say that because the BDS call is a call from Palestinian civil society with the aim of respecting Palestinian civil and political and human rights. And so to ban that is to basically ban the voice of Palestinians and to say that they don't matter and that they have no legitimacy. And so baked into that is an anti-Palestinian racism. And that anti-Palestinian racism is underpinned by the global Islamophobia climate that we still have. And of course, Islamophobia has morphed over the last 10 years, but it's still prevalent. Yes. And that explains how in the UK we have, for example, Tony Blair regularly invited onto television a man who was, in a sense, an architect of the Iraq War that led to something like 1 million excess Muslim deaths in Iraq. So the schema, the ideological schema that allows for that is one that is Islamophobic and dehumanizes these populations. And so that is the context in which we're seeing these developments.
Indeed. So then, Robbie, in a climate in an era of Brexit, many people did say, and we can of course argue whether it's fair or not, but nevertheless, many people felt that the Brexit campaign itself back in 2016, or even earlier before that even began, was already quite Islamophobic, anti-immigrant, certainly at many levels. Do you think that the country is heading as a society as well at some levels in a way which is Islamophobic, anti-immigrant, racist, really?
I think that's a hard question to measure because what we have to deal with is several separate strands. What we're seeing is there were several incidents which we saw a real questionable response to. I think the first questionable response was the whole situation around grooming gangs, in which it was entirely backfired. We didn't have an honest discussion about serious problems that occurred. And what happened was the far right took up that opportunity to demonize and hate Muslims. And if centrist individuals and more moderate individuals don't take up an opportunity to discuss issues, what we see is something happening there. It's the same with immigration. We've seen that if centrist individuals don't discuss problems around assimilation and, inter-community tensions, we see the far right flock to these issues because they know they can make headway on them. So I really think, whilst I would say I do not think Britain is racist in any way comparable to many other countries in the world, yes, we do have issues, and yes, we are seeing populists rise, largely because there has been a failure in the centre ground of politics to deal with many issues which have been seized upon by very clever and malicious and malignant and malevolent operators on the far right.
I'll give the final word to you. You're in France right now, so I mean, that's a country which has its own major issues with Islamophobia, doesn't it? Even coming from government ministers directly at many times. Do you think that this then is not an issue, certainly, which is limited to the UK and is something that's growing across Europe?
Well, my colleague speaking there is absolutely spot on. This is a push to the right. Powerful global forces behind it, Trump, Brexit, and Boris. They are three forces, three events, which are all pushing us in the direction of nativism, in the direction of intolerance. And it is indeed a scary time, and it is a time to fight back directly against these dark forces and these dark developments.
Wonderful. Well, we'll leave it there at that. But of course, we appreciate both Harry and Robbie for their time today, and of course for putting this into context for us. Viewers, all four of our guests discussing about the UK Islamophobia, specifically Islamophobia within the Conservative Party and the anti-BDS law, which Boris Johnson is set to pass at some point in the near future, possibly. Those are worrisome signs, specifically for the Muslim community, of course. Islamophobia in a much more obvious way, and with the anti-BDS law in a more indirect fashion. That it's really the Muslims not under attack necessarily, but who are going to now be sidelined. Their right to free speech, their right to protest in a non-violent fashion using a boycott movement of their choosing, even in a united fashion, is nevertheless their democratic right. They're allowed to choose what products to buy out of their free will. Now, is it something that will create a clash with the foreign policy of the government? That's something normal, isn't it, where citizens and even municipalities would have clashing views with their federal respective governments. And then, of course, within Islamophobia, within the Conservative Party itself, it's been denial from day one, hasn't it? Where the Labour Party at least was able to work through its issues with anti-Semitism at some level, with even the Labour Party leader dealing with that issue and coming out very strongly against all forms of hatred. We haven't seen the same from Boris Johnson, because he himself already holds many of these Islamophobic views also, as we've seen in past writings and past opinions of his. So a worrying time in an era of Brexit in the UK, both Islamophobia and, of course, for how that country views the issue of Israel-Palestine. I'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.